Space Station Sillicon Valley is a great Nintendo 64 game I remember fondly from my childhood, and it still holds up, I think. I even consider it to be the predecessor to Super Mario Odyssey, so if you enjoyed the gameplay of that game, maybe you'll enjoy Space Station Sillicon Valley. However, I'm not just focusing on the N64 Classic, but also the PlayStation port, which was renamed to Evo's Space Adventures, and I'll mostly just be comparing the two. If you were in the rare minority that saw my other video, this video shouldn't be too much of a surprise. It wasn't really a matter of if this video would come out, but when. So jumping right into it, the story is the same as the N64 version, with Dan Danger and Evo going on a mission to explore Space Station Sillicon Valley and stop it before it crashes into the Earth. But unfortunately they crash land and Evo's shell breaks apart, leaving Evo to travel as a microchip and try to collect the parts to fix his robotic body. Jumping from robotic animal to robotic animal, utilizing their different abilities to complete level objectives and save the world. So it contains most of the levels from the N64 version, however a handful are taken out. Those being the engine room, stinky sewers, and Rat-O-Matic from the Europe section, something fishy from the Arctic section, Evo's escape from the jungle section, hot cross buns from the desert section of the space station, as well as the final level which sits at the center, Big Celebration Parade. I'm not sure why they were removed, honestly. Maybe it's because of the use of FMV taking up extra space compared to the real-time cutscenes like the original, or maybe it's something else. I don't really know for sure. But you wouldn't know when you're looking at the level select screen since it only tells you the level description and objectives, not the name of the actual stage or what you actually collected in it like the N64 version. They don't even show that info in the pause menu, which makes 100%ing this game all the more annoying, if that's even possible to do in the first place. So right off the bat, it already downplays how useful the collectibles are. Funnily enough, one of the levels taken out would technically be considered narratively important, and it was a level where you retrieve a part of Evo's robotic shell parts. And that level being Evo's escape, and it's sort of this on-rails shooter stage, where you try to get a score of at least 12,000 by the end, and it's pretty tough and might take a few times. Then again, that actually applies to a decent chunk of the levels between both games. You're also playing as Dan Danger for this level as you try to locate and neutralize Evo. You seem to be feeling a little rebellious for this level, but if you do beat it, you get a piece of Evo's shell, which again, this was removed from the PlayStation port. Mind you, this is almost 2 years after the original N64 version, and it just feels like a complete downgrade in almost every way. While the original Space Station Sillicon Valley for the Nintendo 64 was developed by DMA Design, this PlayStation port was designed by Runecraft, which explains why there's such a stark contrast in how the games look and play. It was like Runecraft tried trimming the extra fat, but cut out a fair portion of the important stuff. Maybe they cut some of the levels they thought were harder, or maybe ones they didn't like. And even then, the overall performance feels inferior to the N64 original, with the open levels in this game having a very short draw distance compared to the original, making it hard to see the rest of the map from the get-go, with the black void taking up most of your view in the distance, where this wasn't even close to being a problem in the original game. Add to that, they're translating a game that originally functioned with an analog stick to be usable with a D-pad. Kinda like how Super Mario 64's optimal experience is considered the N64 version because of the analog stick, but the controls had to be changed slightly to accommodate the D-pad for the Nintendo DS. There's also the fact that you can't freely move around the stages in the level select. Even if you beat them all, you have to go from left to right. Or rather, you can't jump from the first level to the last level you just beat by going from right to left. Almost as if there's a barrier between the first and last levels, if that makes sense. Sure, it's a minor gripe, but in the N64 version, it was easier to jump through the zones, rather than tediously going through them from left to right to get to the specific stage you want to play. Aside from the UI being a downgrade, there's also the fact that they made changes to the art style of the robotic animal models that sort of lack the pizzazz that I feel the N64 version had. Take the dogs for example. The eyes are just drawn onto the model and are way less expressive than the N64 counterpart. But that's just one example out of many others. To add to that, there's not even a proper ending. This is gonna get into spoilers, so if you already know about the ending to Space Station Sillicon Valley or don't care, you could keep watching. I mean, I might as well continue since Evo Space Adventures doesn't have a proper ending anyway, so I don't feel too bad about spoiling it. So in the N64 original, after collecting a bunch of power cells and completing Evo's metallic body that was destroyed in the beginning of the game, you confront the evil brain in the final level of the game, who turns out to be the puppet master for the events in this game. If you went the extra mile and collected every power cell in the game, the shell would be gold at this point in the game. But you wouldn't really be able to tell if you collected all of the power cells in the PlayStation version unless you heard a special jingle or made a note of the levels you collect all the power cells in, which I didn't really bother to do. Not that it would matter anyway for that version, since this final level is absent in the port. So in Space Station Sillicon Valley, the predecessor and what I think is the better version of Evo Space Adventures, the evil brain is revealed as a passive observer, being impressed by the results of Evo's journey as he made his way through the game's namesake, with the hopes to shrink and take over the world, and also take over Evo's body. Evo is able to make quick work of the evil brain, but his death leads to the space station going on a collision course with the Earth. So it's up to Evo with his laser vision to take out the remaining robotic animals on the space station before the space station crashes and destroys the Earth. Going around the small city to take them out, with the most annoying ones to deal with being the dog planes, since they fly pretty high up. It's fun using the laser vision on these animals, as well as actually getting to play as Evo and seeing what he could do after all this time of playing as other creatures. Sure, there isn't a grandiose ending after this, but it goes right to the credits after, but that's a lot better than the PlayStation port. With that game's last level technically being a shoot 'em up, with the description of Fly Evo Fly. Anyway, it's basically the Nintendo 64 secret level that you would have gone from collecting all the trophies, but you could still access it in the N64 version with the level select code. However, instead of being an endless level with the point to get the highest score possible like the N64 one, the PlayStation one starts at 50,000 points and goes down from there. When you beat it, you'll think there'll be something after, especially given that before the level starts, there's a cutscene of Dan, Danger, and Evo in their spaceship going into an asteroid belt. But the objective for this shoot 'em up stage being to take out the asteroids and enemies until the score counts down to 0, with the level starting at 50,000 points. To make it fair, every 10,000 points earns you an extra life, but since the score counts down, you'd think there was a purpose to beating it. But nope, after beating the level it goes to a loading screen, then right to the main menu. It just feels so hollow beating it since you have to destroy all these obstacles and it's fairly difficult. I get that it was intended to be a level in the N64 version after getting all the trophies, but you really don't need to do that for the PlayStation version, since it could be unlocked normally. The backgrounds between the two are also different, and the PlayStation version makes it a bit more difficult to beat. For the PlayStation version, it's a space background, so it's mostly black with white star specks in the background. But for the N64 version, there's actually a background that seemingly takes place within the space station. And it's easier to actually see the projectiles coming towards you compared to the PS1 version. It'd be one thing to try and get a high score, but there's no reason to it. Sure, the N64 secret level isn't too special either, but at least it feels more purposeful, even if by a little. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but it feels pointless to play this port of the game. Sure, it's based on a Space Station Sillicon Valley, which is a great game, but they unnecessarily trimmed some of the meat off with this, cutting out a fair amount of levels and changing the feel of it. And they really didn't even include a reason to beat this game considering there's no proper ending or credit sequence. Maybe you might think it's not necessary to have an ending for a game, and maybe you're right, but when the credits roll, I almost always feel a sense of satisfaction of beating the game, but it's impossible to in this port. The only thing that this game fixed from the N64 original was that you could actually get the trophy in Fat Bear Mountain. But that's insignificant in the grand scheme of things, since you could just unlock the shoot 'em up you'd get from collecting the trophies by entering a cheat code. Cheat codes such as unlocking all the levels in a zone and the secret level were present in the N64 version, and like most of the other features in that game were removed for this port. So if you wanted to quote unquote beat the game, you'd have to go through all of them in order without skipping any in between. Well, except for the last actual stage where you play as the boxing kangaroo in the tournament, which this game doesn't really seem to penalize you for not playing, since you could just jump into the shoot 'em up level without needing to play that. At least I was able to. And since the game doesn't have an ending anyway, it doesn't matter too much. My point is, this could have just remained an N64 game and that would have been fine. There wasn't a real need to make a PlayStation port for the sake of it, especially when the original game mostly does everything better. The one redeeming factor is that it's based on an already great game, which is what actually makes it somewhat playable. One interesting thing I discovered from the PlayStation version that I wanted to mention in this video was that for at least some of the levels, there may be parallel universes that I found that may or may not occur in other levels in the PlayStation 1 and N64 versions. The one level I did notice this in was the desert level Shifting Sands, or Nameless Level 23 in the PlayStation version. When you reach the northernmost wall of the map after going down the waterfall in the PlayStation version, I saw that there was a duplicate map on the other side. Because the emulation was a bit sloppy when rendering the stage, I was able to find this. This duplicate section may have been added due to when you spin the 10 as the Desert Fox, the level may be teleporting you as you do it into the parallel version of the map in order to achieve the effect of the shifting sand slopes. Since the game sorta lacks you in the 10 until the transition is complete, so you're probably switching between the duplicate stages during each transition, or at least that's my theory. If this is present in the PlayStation port, it must be present in the N64 original, right? Well, I had to test that, and it was a little more difficult than I hoped. I tried to jump against the wall, but had no luck in seeing what was on the other side. It was then that I really noticed there's a small area that protrudes from the wall that seems like it could be stood on. I tried jumping on it with the pogo kangaroo, but couldn't get that much height. So I decided to kill the vulture and try to get on it that way. After about a minute of trying, I was able to get on the small area protruding from the wall, and after playing around with the camera, I was able to see part of that parallel world, if only for brief moments. Who knows, maybe it applies to other levels too, but I just haven't discovered it yet. It makes sense considering that the PlayStation game of Evo Space Adventures is a port of the N64 game Space Station Sillicon Valley, so it makes sense that assets were reused. I just don't know to what extent. Okay then, I think it's about time to start wrapping this video up. I think Space Station Sillicon Valley really is an underrated N64 gem, or at least I don't think it gets the attention it rightfully deserves. It's just an interesting concept of a 3D platform where the gameplay can change at a moment's notice based on what animal or thing you decide to become, much like Super Mario Odyssey. If given the choice between the PlayStation port and the N64 original, the original game wins every time. So what I learned from making this video is, Space Station Sillicon Valley should come to the Switch Online service, darn it, and I'll continue to hold out until that happens. Especially since it's still fun and definitely a unique game that deserves more exposure. But that's gonna be it for this video. Let me know if you guys ever played Space Station Sillicon Valley or Evo Space Adventures in the comments below, as well as your thoughts on them. Until the next one, take care.